Oh man, has another tournament cycle passed already? Where does the time go? Well, regardless of how we got here, this tournament was pretty wild. It's practically impossible to not have messy power rankings at this point in time, so this should be a pretty fun video. Just like last time, the bulk of this content will consist of my regional rankings rather than a list with every single team all clumped up together. If you're interested in what my overall rankings would look like, then stay tuned until the end of the video. Additionally, you're going to notice some specific numbers on the screen. The number on the left is where a team is placed, and the one on the right for the graphic will indicate how many spots a team jumped up or down compared to the previous rankings. And that's basically everything you need to know, so how about we get right into the power rankings by starting off with the West. And at number 13, we have none other than the Vancouver Titans. And I mean, there's no way they could be put any higher, right? They're still a winless roster. It doesn't really matter if they got a new coach or maybe showed some improvement in some areas. 0-6 is still 0-6. They had the worst performance out of any team in the West for sure, and it goes without question. And so long as this continues, Vancouver's going to stay right where they are. The meta is likely to see a major shakeup during the Summer Showdown, which could be the opening they're looking for to catch somebody off guard. Teams that have nothing to play for can be terrifying to deal with. But until we get to that point and they do prove themselves, 13th is where they stay. Moving on to number 12, you've got the alexyOWL. This meta was definitely better suited for them. They weren't quite as lost at certain points in time thanks to Yaki and Gangnam Jin, and taking Houston and Dallas to a map 5 is pretty sick. But I mean, they still finished 0-6 in the qualifiers, there's no denying that. On top of that, New York was wildly inconsistent. There was some pretty, but also a lot of ugly. It's hard to say if they're making progress for sure when there's no results to be found. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if it's going to get any better thanks to things like recent coaching changes and potential meta changes on the horizon. This season seriously might just be a wash. Up next at the number 11 spot will be the Paris Eternal, and they're essentially in the same place as New York, but with a win under their belts during the qualifier. It was some small improvement in a couple of places with a few competitive sets, but obviously a lot of stuff to work on still. There were times where they were practically crawling to the finish line and there was no organization whatsoever. It was honestly tough to watch, especially considering they did have a couple of those really amazing sets in between. There were some great individual efforts from guys like Khan and Wub in my opinion, but it's not nearly enough to get you excited when it's just a couple of guys. Paris still have a long way to go still. The only teams they're obviously better than were the two who did not win a game, so not a great look at all for them still. Coming in at number 10 will be the Boston Uprising, and I don't really mind how they played this stage. The teamwork was much improved, and maybe the tank situation felt a bit more organized compared to the kickoff clash. For the most part, I'd say they were not horrible. Win or loss, they were getting a lot of good performances out there to make you feel optimistic. However, at the end of the day, they stagnated in the win count department. It was basically the same as the kickoff clash. And it's pretty hard to move a team up in your power rankings if they just do the exact same thing when it comes to like the achievement department. I appreciate their competitive nature, but I'm not blown away still. But who knows? If the DPS continue to look more comfortable out there and Crimzo plays consistently, maybe there still is hope for a turnaround. Watch this group with a lot of cautious optimism. I think they're one right meta away from being somewhat scary. And at number 9, you've got the Washington Justice. Yeah, not a great qualifier out of these guys. They had an opportunity to qualify for the Midseason Madness, and they blew it. They choked a couple of map 5s, which was very disappointing. I think that a 2-win stage could have been a lot more. And think about some of their other struggles aside from the clutch factor. Their lineup choices at times were a bit all over the place. And I mean, they went to map 5 against Vancouver. That's a little concerning, is it not? The Justice left you unsatisfied due to the simple fact that you knew they could have done more. I really hate seeing this team be something less than what they should be. Hopefully next stage is different. Number 8. The Toronto Defiant. Ah yes, another team that was just okay. They existed, that is my best way of putting it. Hisu put on a good display with Sojourn, and I think the team only got swept once from start to finish if I remember correctly, so that's not the worst outcome in the world. But there's still an obvious skill gap between them and everybody else I have listed above them. They're barely above the cutoff line, and it's for good reason. This team is seriously lacking in the adaptability department. Maybe it's a coaching thing. I just wonder if they have it in them to be clutch because of things like this. They're just not a serious threat to anybody. They surprise you at times on these random instances, but it's for like one map at a time, and that's just not enough to get your attention. Without that true star power or a really good meta, they're mid. That's what happened during the midseason madness, which is exactly why they land at the number 8 spot on this list. Number 7. The Florida Mayhem. Their qualifier left a lot to be desired. Their schedule, in all fairness, was pretty tough on them, and they clearly weren't prepared for the challenge, and yet, when it really mattered, they still did show up. When Hawaii came along, they put it all behind them like it never happened. Their performance in the lower bracket was admirable. The Mayhem play with a lot of intensity when they're in the right mindset, and that's why I really appreciate their performance this stage. The good teams don't let the hardships get to them. They're always going to find a way to get back up and play with some confidence. A few reverse sweeps last month is evidence of this, right? They've got a tough mental over there, and that is why I don't totally hate where the Mayhem currently stand. Even through the struggles, you can find things to like. They have that dog in them, so to speak, and I respect it a lot. They were clutch during the big moments, and I could not be more proud of them for doing so. Number 6. The London Spitfire. The Spitfire continue to move up and just up, and they gain your respect constantly. Like, I don't think people realize how good of shape they're truly in. A team with little to no expectations is 8-4 on the year. A 5-1 qualifier with a lot of sick moments is more than you could ever ask for. Would I consider the Spitfire elite? No, I would definitely not take it that far. But man, were they fun to watch, and it's not like they didn't give some good teams a run for their money either. Look at how bad they ruined the Atlanta Reign during that tournament match, for crying out loud. It was brutal. The Spitfire are not supposed to be some title contender, but that's okay. They have what it takes to still scare you. Oh, and if you were wondering why I put them over Florida despite losing to them in the tournament, it's because they were simply more consistent overall this stage. Their schedule was definitely easier, but I still did feel like they showed better effort against their superiors, and they beat the Atlanta Reign, so that's gotta count for something. They were maybe a bit more clutch outside of that final week too, but in general, these two are very close, and you may even consider them interchangeable for the time being. But anyway, let's move on to my number 5 spot, which goes to the Houston Outlaws. To keep it short and sweet, they weren't any better or any worse than last stage to me. It was more of the same exact thing. We had thrillers in typical Houston fashion along with the head scratchers. They just were, there. They weren't bad, but they weren't incredible either. I still have my typical criticism of them not being good enough to be a legitimate title contender this year, but you can't exactly complain about their consistency so far. A 5-1 qualifier and an okay tournament run is not bad at all. Some people might say they essentially played at London's level, but I see one major difference in their play. Unlike London, you can usually feel pretty good about Houston beating anybody below them in the rankings. In all fairness, they have had a lot of close calls recently, but they always end up pulling through. With London, it's maybe a bit less certain thanks to their struggles against Florida and whatnot though. Houston still feel like the bigger threat to me. They scare me a bit more, and I just have less questions about them, so that's why they get the number 5 nod. Moving on to number 4, you've got the other team from Texas, aka the Dallas Fuel. These boys took a notable dip compared to the kickoff clash. Without that Zarya comp of theirs, they were forced to adjust, and I think we saw some mixed results because of it. They were clearly no match for any of the top teams. We've witnessed firsthand just how different things are compared to a year prior. It is their turn to adjust now. They are not the ones who get to dictate the meta or consistently get away with their comfort picks. Now there has to be a true mix. You have to be able to play the best stuff, and right now they can't always do it. Things like sniper and double flex support centric compositions were a real struggle for them. And while it seems like we'll be going away from that kind of stuff in the Summer Showdown, you never know when it might come back due to those balance changes. Next stage could be a completely different Fuel team, for better or worse. But if we strictly think about how they did the past month or so, there was obvious regression. To go out there in pathetic fashion in that tournament and against many of their biggest rivals is simply not a good look for a team that had relatively high expectations on the year. You just can't justify putting Dallas any higher currently. It's not possible. Let's see how things go with a fresh start now. Keep a close eye on them. And now, we have officially entered the top 3. And who else could we possibly go with aside from the Atlanta Reign? How do they always end up doing it, man? Every single time you think that it's time to count this team out for good, they always end up bouncing back with major authority. They had their ups and downs yet again, but it all ended up doing them a lot of good when it truly mattered. The moment it was tournament time, they were locked in. It was a pretty sick losers bracket run out of those guys. They beat a lot of great teams all in a row, and it's worthy of a lot of praise. They adjusted to the new meta very well, and also realized that the key to success likely lies within Hawk. I saw a lot of good things out of this group. I thought both the DPS and Hawk were balling out. And because they were so competitive and they beat so many good teams, they absolutely deserve a high ranking currently. Keep up the good work, boys. I'm really proud of you. Anyway, at number 2, I have the San Francisco Shock. There's not much reason to explain this one, right? They were one of the top 2 teams in the league clearly during this stage. They made it look very easy. San Francisco were incredible. The potential of this young core shined through big time. A tournament finals appearance, another undefeated stage, the potential to defeat any team in the league. It's sick, man. It is an understatement to say that they were elite in the midseason madness. The issue of them choking was a non-factor. Just a solid outing from one of the most exciting new rosters that this league has to offer. I truly do not have any major criticisms. Their schedule, yeah, it maybe wasn't that hard, but come tournament time, they left you absolutely speechless. Proper continued to do his thing while the support line got even better thanks to a meta shift. And let's not forget the extra versatility that Mikey adds. And they're still figuring things out too, you know? That's the most terrifying part about this roster. They technically have not reached their full potential yet. They can still go higher and higher and higher as time goes on. But for what it's worth, here in the present, they're solid. You know who else is solid though? The LA Gladiators, who occupy the number 1 spot on the list. As the clear-cut number 1 team in the league currently, there was absolutely no question that they'd be here, and there's absolutely no way anybody could argue against it right now. I mean, come on, a flawless qualifier and being the winner of the global tournament? It really does not get much better than that. The Glads once again showed that they are meta-proof thanks to a strong collective effort from their roster. They could play pretty much any composition possible at the highest level. I was once again very impressed by those rookies in particular. They continue to be very valuable assets to an already stacked roster. The sky is the limit with this group, I'm telling you. They have so many options, and the coaching is top-notch too. They've got it all, man. And while it is unreasonable to say they aren't untouchable or anything like that, they really will be tough to take down no matter what. They genuinely thrive in high-pressure environments, and they're quick to adjust. And with back-to-back tournament wins under their belts, the confidence is sky-high right now. This is one of the most well-deserved number 1 rankings in recent memory. Brilliant stuff, boys. And that's going to conclude the teams out of the West. Here's an outlook in its full form if you are curious. Pretty standard stuff here, right? It's obvious who's the best, and it's obvious who's the worst. The West just keeps it nice and clean, really. The biggest winners are going to be the Glads for staying at number 1 and all, and the Spitfire who moved up an astonishing 3 spots. And all the other winners saw fairly minor movement, and they're just not worth bringing up. Things maybe got a bit more interesting when we look at the losers, though, as the Dallas Fuel ended up getting knocked out of the top 3 for the first time in what seems like forever, and the Justice also went down a few spots for a mediocre performance. Everybody else was pretty much the same. I definitely can't say the same for the East though when we look more towards the top, but before we get there, we gotta start with the bottom feeders. At number 7, we've got the Guangzhou Charge, no ifs, ands, or buts. They were definitely the worst team in this region, and arguably the worst or second worst team in the league. They were absolutely lost out there every single game. They struggled mightily in so many different areas and did not pose a challenge a single time. There was so little to be optimistic about. I mean, you had Choi Se-Wan doing his thing from time to time, but then a whole lot of meh to guide him, and it's clear that the Charge were ready to give up too, because they made drops and found new reinforcements soon after, which almost makes their performance this stage feel irrelevant as they're practically a new team again. But regardless, they still weren't very good, so they've got to be last. But you all knew that was coming. There's no need to waste any more time, so let's get into the number 6 spot, which will go to the LA Valiant. I mean, they started off strong, right? They had their moments of glory in that first week, but this is a marathon, not a sprint. One map over the final 4 games is not a great way to end. There is an adjustment period to be had right now. Without that Zarya comp, just like with the Dallas Fuel, there were times where they were practically left dead in the water. There was maybe a bit less order to their methods as they picked up other compositions and added more players into the rotation. They lacked that same fire that we saw just a couple months ago. They improved slightly in the win column, which I suppose is a positive to take away here, but they did take a step back in that threat department. Not a fan of what I saw. They still have a long way to go, and that could not be more clear. Number 5. The Chengdu Hunters. Chengdu don't get to move up or down either. They made some progress in some aspects. Things are definitely starting to come together a bit more compared to the previous stage. They played a lot of good sets this time around and were way more threatening. Leave and Gaga were definitely back in their comfort zone, and Chengdu thrived because of it. But when it comes to general success, they just came up a little short. And that's the main reason why I can't put them any higher currently. The opportunities were there to prove themselves, but they could not fully deliver, because at the end of the day, they did get left out of this tournament. In other words, the Hunters currently stand as the gatekeeper and underdog threat of the East. And unless your name is the Philadelphia Fusion, you likely are not good enough if you cannot defeat them. Very middle of the pack. Sometimes they're scary, but usually they're not. I see it starting to take shape with this group, but something still isn't right. Anyway, moving on to the number 4 spot, you've got the Shanghai Dragons. Genuinely, I did not mind the way that the Dragons played at all. Placing them at number 4 might seem a little misleading because of this, so let me explain. The Dragons did well, okay? Lip and Fleta, I think they looked a lot like their old selves. And I also believe that Shanghai realized a major key to success comes through Li Gon. The stage did not finish in the most ideal way possible, but you could feel their confidence and their old selves starting to return to form. They proved that they can still be a dangerous team, and that's all that really matters. But still, you simply have to take off points for the slow start and uninspirational play against Western Conference foes. They lacked that same consistency of like the Spark or the Dynasty, and they lacked the peak of the Philly Fusion. It's fine to like where the Dragons are at right now, but you shouldn't fall in love just yet. And at number 3 is the Seoul Dynasty. God, it pains me to put them this low. There were so many reasons to feel confident in them, and to be fair, they lived up to the hype at first. They were popping off. Stalker was getting more involved, Prophet and Fitz were doing their thing still, Smurf was consistent, the supports were doing well, everything seemed so great. I mean, they were breezing through their opponents. But then came the final 3 matches of the midseason madness. That is when the soul of old came back to play. This team that was looking so good as a unit suddenly could not do anything right. To flop as hard as they did in the tournament is so disappointing. They're still the number 3 team for their general consistency, but to not show up when it matters, yeah, you can't be in the top 2. Everybody has bad weeks from time to time, so I don't think it's the end of the world, but you can't exactly call them the best in Asia after such a poor ending. They're still the best record-wise, but that might not last for long if they keep slipping up like this. Coming in at number 2, you've got the Hangzhou Spark. The Spark were who I thought of as the most consistent team in APAC. They played pretty well in the qualifiers and were just one map away from a top 4 or better finish in the tournament. Not much else you can really ask for in that aspect, just a respectable outing from a team that continues to prove themselves. There's not much more you can ask for aside from maybe improving and winning a couple more games. Their DPS, they were straight up fire, and the team itself contended with some of the toughest teams the tournament had to offer. If I'm a Spark fan, I'm feeling pretty good about what I saw. But unfortunately, they don't take the number 1 spot for one simple reason. There were some weird inconsistencies going on against a couple of APAC opponents, and one other team also just had a bit more success from both a regional and a global perspective. The number 1 spot belongs to the Philadelphia Fusion. It feels strange putting them up here since their qualifier was honestly pretty average, but it's how they played when it counted that really puts them over the top. Top 4 is a very impressive feat. Everybody seems so alive despite all of the issues going up against them. They once again showed that they are very clutch in the big moments. And like, when you think about it, it's hard to justify putting Hangzhou or Seoul over them because both of them, yeah, they had the better qualifiers, but Philly was getting the best of them in the head-to-head. They literally beat the Spark twice and made Seoul look really silly. Even if they were inconsistent, it's incredibly difficult to not have them number 1 when considering all this information. Do I have supreme confidence in putting them this high up? Oh god, no. They have been all over the place this year. But how could I not right now? The only real criticism is them not winning more games during the qualifier. They pretty much check off all of the other boxes you're looking for. Should you expect their time at the top to last though? I mean, probably not, right? But for now, it's well deserved. But yeah, that basically wraps up the Eastern rankings. It feels right, but also oh so wrong. It's this giant cluster of confusion, and it's kind of been that way since the start of this year, right? It feels like a free-for-all after that bottom 3. It's best not to think too much about it though, as it's just going to lead to more confusion. So I won't. Instead, we're going to quickly highlight who moved up and down the most. The East in a lot of aspects saw minor changes. The biggest winner here is obviously Philly for moving into number 1, as well as the Spark for moving up a couple of places. Then the biggest loser is clearly Seoul, who were the only team here to move down multiple places. That is about it on that front though, so now it's time for a brief summary of my overall rankings 1 through 20. As mentioned previously, the Glads in my eyes are definitely number 1 right now. They're a shoo-in for that spot, and with how good the Shock were, they just have to be number 2. And if we really want to get toxic here in this video, you may have noticed that there is a new number 20 in town. Vancouver may be winless, but at least they put up a couple of good fights during the qualifier. The Charge, on the other hand, really did not, which is why I see them as the current league bottom feeder. Everything else, though, in this list is maybe a bit difficult to explain. I won't even lie to you. The giant clump of APAC teams together near the top feels incredibly weird, but the thing is, they were head and shoulders above teams 4 through 13 in the West, so it just would not make sense to mix and match them all together. I don't see Dallas or Houston being better than any of these teams right now. It's just not a thing. In terms of who benefited and fell the most, the Reign, Spark, Shock, and Spitfire all took notable jumps, going up 3 or more spots each. Then you have teams facing negative outcomes, like the Fuel, Justice, and Dynasty, who plummeted 2+ spots each. The Fuel, I mean, they went down a staggering 5 spots compared to the kickoff clash. That's pretty wild. But when you suddenly don't show up in a tournament like Dallas or Seoul, big changes are bound to happen, right? But I mean, aside from that, I'd say a lot of the changes in this list were pretty minimal. A lot of teams plateaued this stage, giving us a clear picture of who is not worth taking seriously. But who knows what might happen from here. There's still a lot of season left to play, and anything is possible. But anyway, that just about does it for the power rankings today. I feel like there were some exciting changes in some aspects, but mostly a lot of boring stuff that did not really change. But maybe you have some different opinions compared to mine. If so, tell me down in the comments below. And while you're at it, considering hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel if you're new if you enjoyed today's content. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.